Okay, so what the hell happened to RWBY? I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure a lot of fans remember RWBY in its early beginnings. The red, white, black, and yellow trailers were so fantastically done, and the hype was set in place for me after I found out this was the work of Monty fucking Oum. And if you don't know who Monty is, well, let me enlighten you.
Fight!
Okay, so this guy right here, had the talent and passion to make his own anime, essentially. And finding out that Rooster Teeth was supporting this project laid the tracks for the hype train to, deport? Take off? What the fuck do trains do? Anyway, the point is, we didn't need much more than these elements to be excited for the series. And when it came out, we basically got exactly what we expected and wanted. Fans didn't really care about the bad voice acting, awkward facial animations, or many of RWBY's countless other issues. The show was a stumbling mess, but much like a drunken friend, we were there for it and loved RWBY for what it was. An action series with sick fight choreography, fun characters, and a certain level of passion and potential behind it. However, after experiencing 3 volumes of RWBY without its creator, the cracks began to show. And while this is going to be a criticism of RWBY, I'm not going to ruthlessly nitpick the show and shit on it. Anybody with a mic and enough time on their hands can do that. And the fact that they wasted hours watching something they just hate really speaks to how boring a person like that must be. Wait, why is it showing one of my videos? Also, I did enjoy RWBY for what it was. I am a fan of Monty's baby. And for those who somehow don't know, in 2015, Monty Oum unfortunately passed away. I know I'm just some random guy on the internet, but I'll always hold a special place in my heart for Monty's work. Rest in peace, Monty Oum.
It's not a long time.
This was RWBY's turning point, and while I did enjoy Volume 3, this was where the current problems with RWBY spawned from. The most obvious change we witnessed was the drop in action and fight scene quality. Funny enough, this isn't even the biggest issue I've had with the last 2 volumes. But it is pretty relevant as RWBY's popularity gained traction from Monty's brilliant understanding of fight and action scene choreography. While a lot of people don't go out of their way to learn why these fights look as cool as they do, it's okay, we have nerds on the internet that dedicate way too much time to making videos that explain it. And I'm going to refer to 2 videos that expanded my knowledge on what makes scenes like these so damn effective. The first video I wanted to take a look at is actually a series of videos.
Oh my dude, you just got pranked!
This guy Cake here, he put together a nice, digestible playlist of videos that break down what made Monty Oum's fights so damn engaging, on a technical level at least. I really do recommend you watch Cake's animation analysis if you want to gain a deeper appreciation for Monty's work, as I'm just going to run through some of Cake's points on this video. There are a few elements we're presented with that are very important in a Monty Oum fight animation. Poses, rhythm, characters, and the rule of cool. I'm going to skip over poses, but I'll put some comparison shots here so you guys can really understand what's so drastically different.
Early in the morning, see the ballerinas standing.
Moving on.
Rhythm.
A well-choreographed fight can't exist without rhythm. Otherwise, it would just be a fight, I guess. If we look at the definition of rhythm, it is a strong, regular, repeated pattern of movement or sound. While this applies to music, it's also very important in fight choreography. Have you ever watched a scene and gotten lost somewhere in the chaos of everything? If you did, that may be because it was lacking rhythm. Rhythm is effective at presenting a pattern, which allows the viewer to follow along and anticipate the next sequence of. In addition to being easy to follow, this also sets up expectations to be either met or subverted, which creates a lot of scenarios where you get exactly what you wanted, or what you didn't even know you wanted. And that brings us to volumes 4 and 5, where there isn't really much rhythm, honestly. It seems very random and stop and go. That is when the scene isn't pausing for a dialogue exchange. Because of this, the recent volumes have fights that are either confusing, boring, or at worst, both.
Character.
The character in a fight is defined by their style, motivations, personality, etc. These are elements that can either make or break the appreciation for a character. For example, Yang was my personal favorite when I began watching, and I was almost completely sold on her after the Yellow trailer. She's a thrill seeker with a short temper that enjoys fighting, and while this is put into words in Volume 2, you didn't really need to hear any of that to understand who she was. You just watched her fight. She's lively, fun, aggressive, tough as shit, loves to fight. She knows she's damn good at it and looks damn good doing it. So, what the hell happened? I'll return to this point later on, but it seems that not just Yang, but a lot of characters have lost a bit of their personality in Volumes 4 and 5.
The rule of cool.
I think the best example of this is the food fight in Volume 2. What do all of these clips have in common? They're fucking stupid. But that's actually a compliment. It doesn't matter if it makes sense, because this is a fictional medium, where communicating a feeling behind an action is more important than the feasibility of said action. Or as Cake so perfectly put it,
the rule of cool is simply an artist's ability to be asked, does that really make sense? And be able to say, does it matter?
as with other things we've looked at, this is also something that seems to be non-existent in modern RWBY. While having a darker tone could excuse this, it's resulted in some very lackluster and forgettable action. And without these elements, RWBY has to rely entirely on the narrative of its fights, which, even with Monty, haven't exactly been strong. What is this narrative you speak of, though? Why, it's the segue into the other video I wanted to talk about. Super Eyepatch Wolf released a video by the name of
What Makes a Fight Scene Interesting?
Which is a great watch if you're curious about, well...
what makes a fight scene interesting?
Anyway, what I specifically wanted to take away from that video and apply to RWBY are the two forms of narrative behind a fight scene. You have technical narrative and emotional narrative. To oversimplify, the technical narrative is the focus on strategies and adaptation that happen during a fight, while emotional narrative has to do with who the fighters are as people and what motivates them, ideals, goals, personalities, etc. As I said, this is very much oversimplified, and I recommend checking out Eyepatch Wolf's video if you want a deeper understanding of the narratives behind a fight. Now let's apply these ideas to RWBY. I find that there are a few small instances of good technical narrative in RWBY. One of my favorite examples is the fight between Yang and Neo. I love this fight because you get a really clear idea of what each character is thinking in regards to strategy. Yang has gotten through a lot of her fights with brute force and aggression, and since Neo is, well, half her fucking size, she has to start the fight relying heavily on defense. She starts off by dodging and observing Yang's attacks, only to counterattack and uses Yang's momentum and weight against her. After Neo begins to get a read on Yang's approaches and attacks, Neo gets more confident and mixes in her own aggression. As soon as Yang finds an answer to Neo's barrage, Neo backs off and returns to her original strategy. Yang, however, continues her aggression and doesn't adapt, which ends up giving Neo the upper hand and ultimately the victory. There's still a bit more I can touch on, and this is all information we received from a 1-minute exchange. Due to the rhythm being solid, the characters being well represented, and the narrative beats hitting where they should, we're able to understand everything without getting lost in the speed of this fight. I feel that the technical narrative in Monty's fights works so well due to his strengths as an animator, and you begin to notice how much we've lost when the best example of technical narrative I could find in volumes 4 and 5 was Blake's fight against Ilya. The pacing of this fight, much like, well, modern RWBY in general, is pretty slow and pauses quite a bit. There is something happening here though, namely that Blake is trying to disengage and throw non-lethal attacks as to not hurt her former friend. But a lot of this is not translated through their actions due to how often the fight pauses for more dialogue exchanges. You know that she doesn't want to fight, but it's mostly told rather than shown. I will give this fight some credit, as it has some sort of an emotional narrative, which is more than I could say about a lot of RWBY's fights, even in volumes 1, 2, and 3. RWBY was never all that great at displaying emotional narrative in the first place. That being said, I never felt its absence was distractingly bad. But seeing Volume 5's final episode's attempt at this is... It sucks. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 8 fucking characters facing off against 1, 2, 3, 6 villains all in one room. This fight lasts 4 episodes, yes, 4 actual 15-minute episodes, and it's the most boring, slow, and anticlimactic climax I've seen in a while. This whole sequence deserves its own video breaking down why it's awful, but I'd like to keep my video under an hour, so I'll sum it up by saying this. Imagine DBZ's pacing of a big fight where almost nothing exciting happens. That pretty much sums up my feelings on Volume 5's climax. Oh, and it doesn't help that the emotional narrative is trapped behind exposition dumps, and even more dialogue exchanges, distracting pauses, and this god-awful cliffhanger. Really? Do they really think that I believe that happened? Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be sad. Let me get a tear real quick. Ah, fuck. Okay, so you remember when, spoiler, died in Volume 3, and how much emotional weight that had? The impact that had on the entire series? You know, how this scene is nothing like that? Did anybody really believe the W in the show's fucking 4-letter title would die in such a stupid and anticlimactic way? Of course she doesn't. This is just bait. That, oh, better watch the next episode kind of bait. Of course no one believed this. Nobody would actually believe you would kill off a character in such a terrible way. If you're going to fake killing off a character, you have to do so in a scenario where it would also make sense to kill said character. Otherwise, guess what? No one will fall for your stupid fake out. And further, hey, you guys remember when we were talking about the narratives in a fight? Well, I got distracted and shifted my focus. I apologize. I'm sorry for losing focus. And that is a phrase I'd really like to hear from RWBY's writers right about now. Okay, so putting all the problems with RWBY's fights behind us, that's actually not what bothered me the most. Volume 3 was actually my favorite volume. It would have been much better with Monty, of course, but it was still engaging and fun. This is where the focus began shifting into a more plot-driven story, but what was good about it was that they still gave us some time with these characters. Volumes 1 and 2 were carried by character interactions while plot developed in the background. Volume 3 struck a good balance of character development and plot progression. These elements smoothly tied into one another as we gained more appreciation for RWBY's cast while the plot put them into more dire situations. I loved this dynamic in storytelling. Getting me to care about these characters only to fuck them up later on leaves a lasting effect on me. This is what I appreciated about Volume 3, it took risks, and that's what makes me feel I need to ask again, what the hell happened? Volume 4 had some potential to win me over, honestly. It had some decently handled character moments, especially early on, but one of the biggest problems is that Team RWBY is completely divided. I originally thought this was going to be a good way to explore each character with their personal struggles and allow for more interactions between characters you don't often see together. But the writers don't exactly balance these separate plots well. Not to mention, due to how much is going on, they feel a need to explain literally every plot point. This is where RWBY's plot begins to take over the show and why it feels RWBY plateaued after Volume 3, at least for me. Volume 3 established that the series was going in a more serious and plot-focused direction, and the 2 volumes that followed just ran with it without devoting as much care to the characters as previous volumes have. The best moments in the current arc of RWBY happen during downtime where its characters get to be themselves, which sadly isn't often. The weakest moments are when we experience massive exposition dumps and are told about the world instead of shown, which happens quite a lot. I understand some people want to really know about the politics of the White Fang, or the planning behind the villains' attacks, the lore of the maidens and the relics, whatever. I don't think I'm the only fan who didn't care about most of these plots. These aren't unique plots. There isn't anything all that interesting or exciting about the White Fang, the villains, Professor Ozpin, Lionheart, the Maidens, etc. So why dedicate so much time to all of these elements? I and many others wanted to see things like Jean really dealing with his loss and talking about it amongst his team. I wanted to see Yang's progression through her depressed state, growing and learning from it, and becoming herself again. I wanted to see Wise call Blake out on her bullshit. I wanted to see RWBY do anything. Funny enough, out of all the characters, RWBY's the least interesting now. The main fucking character. She just sort of exists to drive the plot by doing the protagonist's job or having a target on her back. I just want moments that make me give a shit about these characters again. I liked Yang because she was a fun character. She was stubborn, she was hot-headed, yet she had a bit more maturity than the others. I liked Wise not because she was a bitch, but because she lightened up around the others while still having enough confidence to say what needed to be said. I liked that RWBY was learning about how to become a leader and was a complete dork. I liked Blake because... I actually didn't like Blake all that much, to be honest. I feel she was the only character that actually got better in the most recent volumes. And I think that's because there was a lot of time put into her story, and her interactions with Sun and her family helped her develop. While this was the best example of character development in these recent volumes, it lasted over the course of both. She didn't even reunite with everybody until the very end of Volume 5, which didn't help Volume 5 stand out from Volume 4. And that brings me to my biggest issue with the show. Why did you start watching RWBY? I watched RWBY because I saw passion and potential. Each new iteration added something that enhanced what was already good about the series, the big exception being the fight animations and choreography we lost with Monty's passing. But even with Volume 3 lacking Monty's touch, I initially liked the direction the series took. Things changed in a way I was not expecting, characters developed, my investment and curiosity about the world grew. It wasn't a perfect series by any means, but I saw it trying to reach for perfection, and risks were taken. I appreciated the show very much for doing so, but as it stands now, nothing has really changed in Volume 4. We got some cleaner visuals and facial animations, we got some character development, but ultimately we just moved from one point to another. After that, Volume 5 was essentially just an extension of Volume 4. It kept doing what Volume 4 already was doing, and it was doing so much worse. We were told more than we experienced. There was very minimal action in this action series, and the characters were incredibly undervalued. But I was still holding on to a thread of optimism after Volume 5 ended. I thought maybe, just maybe, this will get better now that everyone is reunited. However, as I planned this video out and did some research, I came across Shane Newville's letter. His open letter to all who treasured Monty Oum. And this was eye-opening. While this letter doesn't have as much hard evidence as I'd like, it feels completely genuine and seems like Shane has nothing to gain from this beyond honoring his mentor and friend. I highly recommend you read this letter if you are a fan of Monty's work. Just know that it's 36 pages long and quite the depressing story about how a business shifted an artist's vision. And it was after reading this that I felt no interest in following RWBY any further. I'm not trying to convince you to drop the show. If you like the direction the series is taking, then by all means, enjoy yourselves. I want you to come to your own conclusion and decide for yourselves. I strongly believe in that concept. I watch and read reviews to expand my perspective, but I will always construct my own opinions and feelings by the end. I want to put this out there because it really speaks to how much I ended up emphasizing with this letter by its end. And it's because of this that I feel it appropriate to end this video with Shane Newville's closing statement. My goal with this letter is not to point fingers, it's not to slander, to lash out. This is not something I wrote in a hurry while stewing in my emotions over it all. This is something that took much thought and consideration. I did my best not to name names or point fingers with blame. My goals are not to cause trouble or bring ruin to the company or any person. Some people told me to stay silent and not to say anything at all, to just let it work itself out, be professional, etc., etc. I also know that Rooster Teeth is a business and that they are just doing what businesses do. They make money. They do what they have to in order to get more sales, and there is nothing wrong with that. But I have a major problem with it if it's going to be done at the expense of the people I care about. This particular situation, it is dishonoring Monty, and treating his wife as unimportant garbage to be kept at a far distance and forgotten. And on top of it all, after everything above, they claim that this is such an honor to be able to continue Monty's legacy. They work continuously to convince the contract animators and staff who are unaware of these truths, of these things in order to keep them pumped and motivated. They say, "What an honor." No, this is not an honor. This is a company IP you are working on. It is no longer Monty's RWBY. It's something different. And people could already see that without a single word from me. It is what it is. And what it is turned into is something I don't want anything to do with. It's sad how little time it took for changes to take place. But it happened, and that's that. While it might make more sense to some why Rooster Teeth offed me, I feel strongly that it went that way on purpose. We have to keep moving forward. I just want the truth to be out there. With everything that has happened, I know all that you've seen are the results of some pretty paper slapped on top to try and cover up the truth. Sorry, but I've been sharpening my scissors and I've finally gained the strength to use them. The best analogy I've discussed with anyone for this whole thing is this. Monty carried the torch. When he passed away, I picked up the torch, and Sheena was there to carry it with me. We were ready. Some people had major problems with that, but they also did not want any part of Monty's torch. So they created a new torch altogether, and did everything they could to make people believe it was Monty's. It was created to look like his, but they made it with their own hands, and are sickeningly proud of it for that reason. I'm still carrying Monty's torch. Sheena is still carrying it. Inspired fans carry it. Anyone who is close to the man and cares enough to honor Monty carries it. We carry Monty's torch, and I have no intention of letting that fire die out. This is what it means to keep moving forward.